Bonfire should have been that tough, that cynical. But I said, if I make that picture, it's going to be a career ender. Like Wells, like McKendrick, I'm going to be like unemployable. The problem of working in the Hollywood system is that people are paid a lot of money to get you to do what they want you to do. And you can lose your way and go along with their concepts. I made a lot of compromises, and it was a disaster.
This is by no means an exception to the rule. What you just heard is director Brian De Palma talking about the production of the movie Bonfire of the Vanities. As it's common in Hollywood, and even more so in De Palma's career, the artists involved in the movie had a vision of what they wanted to make, but the pressures of the studio and its producers made this vision be compromised, much to the dismay of the artists. This kind of structure of an artist having his or her vision slashed by the people who call the shots is not exactly a modern phenomenon. If you were, let's say, an opera composer in the middle of the 18th century, you would have to write according to what your patrons demanded. You wanted to criticize the monarchic system? Well, if you like not starving to death and having all parts of your body, I'd suggest you refrain from that. And although the internet has made it so artists have obtained a degree of artistic freedom greater than ever before, something that I might want to go into in a specific video in the future, maybe, there are still forms of art and entertainment, or better said, industries of creation, which still have the controlling eye of those in charge of money and decision making. And to be clear here, I do not believe that this system is inherently a bad thing. Many times an artist gets lost in its vision, wanting to make something so big and grandiose that the enormous quantities of ideas get lost and are kinda haphazardly thrown together in a messy final product. J.R.R. Tolkien, after the success of The Hobbit, famously wanted to make a gigantic work on the Nordic myths, of which he was a scholar and had a profound knowledge of. However, his editors looked at it and said, "Yeah, that's cool and all, Tolkien, but we just want The Hobbit too. You know, The Hobbit, but more." And so, against his initial will, Tolkien went and wrote The Lord of the Rings, arguably the greatest English novel of the 20th century. Another instance of producers being a positive influence is when the artist has an idea, but lacks the vision for the form. In the book Making Music, legendary Beatles producer George Martin tells in detail how, when John Lennon came to him with the song Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, the song was little more than the lyrics and the chords on guitar being played by John. It was George Martin, with his amazing arranging skills, that gave the music its grand form, which, if you listen closely, you'll notice how it is intricate and very detailed. The Beatles had input in the process, of course, but it was the figure of the producer who was central to its final creative form. My point is, producers are not always a bunch of assholes who just want to clip the wings of the artists and destroy their creative input with an evil laughter and a cigar that was lit on a burning dollar bill. There are cases in which they can be very positive for the work, and cases where they are detrimental. That being said, we tend to hear a lot more stories about artists complaining about the interference of editors and producers. My guess is that happens due to human nature, because think with me. When you buy something at a store and it goes fine, you may make a compliment, though most of us won't, and even if we do, it will most likely be a brief one. However, if you order a PS5 and they deliver you a brick, you're probably gonna write a pretty big and angry comment about it and try to make it as public as possible. And I think the same happens in the creative industry. If the production cycle was good and smooth, you will have compliments here and there. But if it was very bad, and you have the liberty to talk about it, you're gonna talk a lot.
And also, juicy gossipy stories tend to get more views than wholesome ones.
No explanation needed there. But why am I saying all this? Well, because today I want to explore a particular case of editing interference in the making of a work. The case of Death Note, and more specifically, its ending. Death Note, for the ones who don't know, is a story of a high school genius called Light Yagami, who finds a notebook from a death god, or Shinigami in Japanese. Whoever has its name written on said notebook will die. The boy starts using the notebook to kill criminals and to make a better world in his eyes. However, police is onto him, and this cat and mouse battle of wits begin, with the police's main figure being a mysterious detective known as L. They try to catch one another, with the series throwing at us questions about morality and what is justice, until finally Light wins and L dies. The series then enters its second part, set many years later, with L's successors Nier and Mello, alongside the police task force,
Pursuing Light, and eventually managing to catch him.
The protagonist then gets killed at the moment of revelation by the Shinigami, which gave him the notebook. I know a lot of people watching are already familiar with Death Note, as it was a hit in the West. I even thought about recommending it in my last video instead of Hunter x Hunter, seeing as Death Note is a story molded in a much more Western fashion. I mean, is there any character with crazy colored hair there? I don't remember. Anyway,
Although a lot of people here have probably watched the anime, I'm guessing a lot less
people have watched the live action adaptation of Death Note.
and I'm talking about the 2006 one, not the Netflix one.
I was curious to see how it would be adapted for two reasons mainly. One, Death Note is a series with a lot of action, but not a lot of supernatural movements and the stuff you'd find in something like Dragon Ball or Naruto. So it is a lot less dependent on CGI, only used for the Shinigamis, which is a controversial CGI, and I might get into that in another video. And number two is that Death Note is a rather small series for anime standards. It has 37 episodes in total, with the first part, which is what the movie depicts, being only 26 long. This can read the adaptation from one of the cardinal sins of live-action anime, trying to cram as many famous moments of the original source material in the movie as it is humanly possible, destroying the cohesiveness of the work in the process. And what's funny in regards to that last point is that the movie did make a change in order to adapt the full 26 episode story. A change to the ending, with L catching Light by writing his own name on the notebook, as whoever writes first gets priority of killing, and choosing the time of death as long as it is 23 days at maximum after the writing of the name. That exposes Light, which then gets killed by the Shinigami. That bit remains the same. But both Light and L die. A draw, some would say. There is no Nier or Mello. And that's a very interesting change in the story, because, you see, when I said they try to catch one another until finally Light wins and L dies,
That is something that many fans
of the series cite as being an error of it, with the second part being commonly perceived as less interesting, something I'm inclined to agree with. But in addition to being a down point for the fans, this moment also marks another thing, a crucial interference of the editors of the manga in the story.
The death of L is something that Tsugumi Ohba,
one of the creators of Death Note, was convinced to do by the editorial staff of Shonen Jump, the famous publication in which Death Note was published. As he later admitted in an interview, he, and I quote, reluctantly let the character go. And as bad-mouthing the editors and producers is a surefire way to get you ostracized from any industry basically, I, with
What I found in my research,
can only speculate from now on. So please take the following claims with a grain of salt. In the point where L dies in the manga, the series is in chapter 58. By the standards of Shonen Jump, that is very few chapters.
to put into perspective,
By chapter 58 of Naruto, the first round of the tuning exam tournament has not even begun yet. And in chapter 58 of One Piece, we are
in the middle of the Baratie arc,
with Sanji not even having concluded his fight. To end the series at chapter 58 would be to make it very short. This is not a problem at all if you look at it from an artistic angle, but if you're talking commercially, that is not good enough, which is what I imagine the editorial staff of Jump must have thought, since Death Note was already a gigantic hit in Japan, and hits like that appear very seldom in the magazine. For every Death Note, there's 100 series you won't even know the name of. So, they must, in their eyes, prolong the series. Shonen Jump doing this kind of thing is not something unheard of. Masashi Kishimoto, author of Naruto, was famously forced to continue his series with the Great Ninja War arc, when he initially intended the fight between Naruto and Sasuke to conclude and happen after the Pain invasion and Itachi's death.
but when a series gets this big,
The owners will want to continue it, even if for that the series gets as shallow and bad fanfic-like as possible. And I believe that's what happened to Death Note. I do not know if the original authors of the manga were involved in the movie, but I feel like the movie ending, although somewhat rushed and rather haphazard, preserves the main plot point that the authors originally wanted to do, with both Light and L dying. And the key to my opinion here, and that led me to formulate this video, which I again reiterate is only speculation, can be found not in an interview or a page comment, but inside another series. Bakuman is only the second series in which Death Note authors Tsugumi Ohba and Takeshi Obata have worked together.
it tells a meta-narrative of two guys,
One manga writer and one manga draftsman, who work together and try to make it big into a fictional version of Shonen Jump. The series is very fun, and it also helps you understand more of the manga industry's inner workings. As the story progresses with the protagonists and their peers and rivals releasing a number of series, which are subjected to the pressure of editors and audience, with some series being more successful than others. In the end of Bakuman, however, the duo makes the series that would finally be their standout hit, a title called Reversi, a series about a high school boy called Schwarz, which means black in German, who gets supernatural powers from a demon. This protagonist is very smart, but also dumb because he thinks all of his ideas and ways of thinking are right, and that the world would be a better place if everyone thought and acted like him. He uses his powers to make what he thinks it's right, but his ways bring out questions of morality, if what he does is justified or not, of what is justice, to which the answer falls ultimately to us readers. The police, centered in the figure of Weiss, which means white in German, sees this strange activity brought about by the supernatural powers of Schwarz, and a cat and mouse game starts, with one trying to catch the other, trying to prove whose justice is correct. Sounds familiar?
yeah,
It's pretty easy to see Reversi as an insert for Death Note. Like what I suppose happened to Death Note, the authors in
Bakuman,
are constantly questioned and pressured about making the series a bit longer, especially if it's getting an anime, since ending the series mid-anime would be detrimental to sales and audience numbers. However, that is what I think is awesome in this part of Bakuman.
Like I said in the beginning, it is not a novelty in any professional big-scale industry to have the editorial staff, or the ones who call the shots, interfering in the creative process. But sometimes the artist finds a way to convey his message in a way that cheats the system. A case that I love in which this happened is in the opera The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. The German composer wanted very much to have a story where the spotlight would not be cast solely on the nobles, but on the common people as well, bringing equality in the plot. But the patrons of the time would not allow this to happen, as it was an unwritten rule that the nobles should be the main heroes and stand above everyone else. Mozart could not do what he wanted in the plot, but he had an idea. It was common practice that the noble hero should be a tenor, which is normally the highest register of a male voice. This would naturally make them stand out, as in music the highest line is commonly the melody, because it is easier to separate it from the rest. Mozart, however, did not do that. He made both the nobles and non-nobles, baritones, a lower registered voice. If he could not equal them in story, he would equal them in music. And that is what I love about this ending of Bakuman. It is an instance of the authors telling us their message through their work, even though they were not permitted in real life. Because in Bakuman, the fictional work Reversi ends with very few chapters, with both main characters dying, the actions of one leading to the death of the other. And Bakuman even goes as far as making the fictional authors refuse to make a proposed second part, with this particular panel indicating for us that if a silver or gold were to be introduced, that would just be bad. As I said, I don't know if Tsugumi Ohba and Takeshi Obata were involved with the Death Note movies, but its ending looks to be closer to what they wanted, because in Bakuman, in which they most definitely were involved, that is the message I get. And especially if it is done inside their own media, I just love it when an artist gets the final say in their work.